into a church in San Francisco. Now that's not so unusual. San Francisco is a big place and there are many churches. What was unusual is that this woman was a lesbian and an atheist. She was, however, the granddaughter of Baptist missionaries. She was also a war correspondent. She had covered wars all over the country. She wrote for the New Yorker and many other fine magazines. And she had a little baby. Unusual woman. Unusual story. Her name was Sarah Miles. And on that day, she was hungry. She'd been walking all around the city, up and down the hills, thinking about her life, thinking about her baby, thinking about her career. She was tired of being a war correspondent, didn't know what was next. But mostly, she was hungry that day. And she came upon a church at Prospera Hill. As some of you know that neighborhood in San Francisco. And there was this beautiful church. And coming from the church was the most amazing music. And she peeked in the door, took her atheist self right up to the door, and looked in and saw what you see on the bulletin cover today, if you have a bulletin. And if we don't, we'll get you one. She saw a worship space that was completely open with a beautiful parquet floor, and in the center of it, a table, a communion table like this, but it was a circular table. And the people were gathered around the table with their hands raised, as Marguerite just did a minute ago with the kids, in prayer, and they were singing and dancing and holding hands and dancing around the table. And above them were all of these icons that you see there. And these icons include some of the traditional ones that you might expect to see of all saints through the years in the Christian church. But there was also Nelson Mandela and Rosa Parks and Sojourner Truth. And Dizzy Gillespie, and Duke Ellington, and Sarah looked at this worship, and she was still hungry. So she went into the church, and she got in the line for communion, as we're going to do today. Came forward to receive communion. And when she received the bread and the cup, she realized how hungry she was. She was famished. But she also realized that she was hungry not only for food and not only for drink. She was hungry for communion. She was lonely. She was hungry for meaning in her life. She was hungry for a sense of mission and purpose. She was hungry for companionship. She was hungry for love. She was hungry for everything that you can be hungry for in this life. And on that day, she was filled. Do you know what happened to Sarah Miles? She had been a cook for many years when she was in her 20s. A cook in Greenwich Village, worked for some pretty good restaurants. She knew the food business inside and out. In the city of San Francisco, those of you who know that city, you know that it's 7 square miles with a lot of people. It's one of the most densely populated cities in the country, in fact, in the world. And many of those people are poor. They're immigrants. They come from many places. China, Russia, former Soviet Union, all over the place. hungry. And Sarah, who had been a cook, knew a lot about food. She had a lot of contacts in the food business. And so she arranged to have a food pantry started every Friday at noon. She wrote a book about it, which is how I came to know her, a book called Take This Bread. And it tells the story of this amazing food pantry. One of the things about the food pantry is that there is no means testing. You don't have to qualify. You don't have to fill out a lot of paperwork. You just give your name. And if you're hungry, you are fed. The other thing that's remarkable is that, as Sarah said, we are blessed or cursed, depending how you look at it, with a lack of a social hall. They don't have a social hall like we do here. And so everything that they do in this church happens right here. So where are they going to feed these people on Friday afternoon? You guessed it. They fed them from the communion table. And I began to think about that. And I thought, wow, she's got it. You feed the people from the table. That table. They got it in the center as a visible sign to anyone who enters that all who come will be greeted with hospitality, welcome to the table, and everyone, regardless of who you are, race, creed, religion, color, nationality, ethnic origin, everyone is welcome at that table, including sexual orientation and gender expression. No one goes away hungry. Everyone is fed. Today, that food pantry is still going, and they feed over 400 people every Friday. I went after I read the book. I had to see this in action. I interviewed Sarah and published an interview with her at New World Writing. You can find it online. And I learned that unlike many churches, which have wonderful, good intentions, the food pantry at St. Gregory of Nyssa is different in this way. Most churches, when they feed hungry people, it's the church feeding the hungry. And it's very, very difficult to get away from power relationships, right? Some people have food, other people don't. Some people are poor, some people have more things materially. And it's very difficult to do ministry in that setting, because there's an inequality, right, in the power relationship. It's almost as though a beggar is coming to be fed bread by someone who is somehow above them. And in its worst case, it could go something like this: oh, you poor people, you poor person, you're so poor, let me feed you. Which is kind of patronizing, right? And can remove dignity. It's not always that way. Depends on the relationships that people have when they do food pantries. And the best food pantries are ones where personal relationships develop, friendships develop. But what's so remarkable about this food pantry is that the people themselves run the food pantry. In other words, Sarah, after running it for several months, the people loved it so much that they wanted to help. And they began to volunteer. And they said, what can we do? This is so great. This is so cool. This is my church. And they began to identify with the mission of feeding hungry people. And so this is not the church feeding hungry people. This is poor people feeding one another. It's very powerful. And as I looked, having read the book, I looked around and I met several of the people who Sarah talked about in the book, and they engaged me in conversation. There was a Russian woman. She came from the Bronx. We had a lot in common. We talked about how she came to know Sarah, how she first came to that food pantry. You know what? She's still coming every week because she's still hungry. But she's a leader. And she helps organize and she helps serve. And we stood shoulder to shoulder, serving. So around this table, they have many other tables in this all around the food pantry. There's a table for bread, or just bread on the table. There's a table for vegetables. There's a table for fruit. And the people go from table to table and they take whatever they need. And they come with these bags, these big bags, or sometimes shopping carts. And, you know, as a server, you just take this big load of whatever it is and you dump it into their bags. And they say thank you, and you greet one another. We may not speak the same language. There were many people there who were Chinese. And we would nod and bless each other and give each other food. And this went on for over 2 hours. And afterwards, we broke down the tables, we sang some songs, and we all went home. And I began to think about this. That experience on Friday, Sarah said, seems more like church than Sunday. Can you imagine that? Can you think that thought? Because what is the gospel if not feeding people and giving them to drink and welcoming them at the table where no one is excluded based on race, nationality, ethnic origin, ability to speak a language, level of educational attainment, sexuality? It doesn't matter. Everybody has a place at the table. Doesn't that sound like the Christian gospel to you? When I was at Chautauqua a couple of weeks ago, at the Chautauqua Institution, which is this wonderful conference that runs all summer, we heard from a speaker named Sonia Desario. Sonia wrote a book called Enrique's Journey, which was on the bestseller list for many, many months. It's a story of a young boy from Honduras who missed his mother. His mother worked for Sonia as a housekeeper. And one day, Sonia, who was of Peruvian descent, happened to just ask this cheerful woman who'd been working for her for years, this housekeeper, have you thought about having additional children? You going to have any more children? And the woman broke down in tears. And that's when she began to give her story. She actually had 4 more children. They were stuck in Honduras. And what had happened was they were so poor. And the gangs, the gangs are overrunning the drug cartels, having been pushed out of Mexico and other places. They are relocating in places in Central America, places like Honduras. And what's happening is it's become so dangerous for the children there that these mothers and fathers, so desperate for a better life for their children, are sending these children to the United States. And these kids, some as young as 9, 10, get on trains. And the journey is over 2,000 miles. They call the train the Beast. And on this train, they're just trying to get to their mothers. They don't know why their mothers have abandoned them. Many of them are very confused. They just want their mama. And so they get on the train. And they go for thousands of miles. And of course, there are many people on those trains who will take advantage of these kids. They will rob them. They'll beat them. They'll take their clothes and their shoes. They'll rape them. And in many cases, they throw them off the train and kill them. And so Sonia, who was a journalist, has written for the Wall Street Journal and many other places, she decided she was going to take that journey on the beast herself. And she did, twice. And she wrote this book called Enrique's Journey. Do you know that Enrique tried 8 times to reach his mother? Each time, he didn't make it. He was beaten, he was robbed, he was almost killed on more than one occasion. About a year ago, you may remember all of the drama at the border where these children were coming unaccompanied by parents. Remember? Seeing those horrific pictures? Children at the border turned back, sent home, deported. When we talk about hospitality in this church or anywhere, we're not just talking about being friendly, inviting somebody into the social hall. We're talking about welcoming the stranger. 38 times in the Hebrew Scriptures, 38 times we are told to welcome the stranger because you know what it was like to be a stranger in a strange land. Therefore, you must welcome the stranger, care for the orphan, assist the widows. Friends, what if we were a church who offered hospitality, where no one entering these doors would ever be again a stranger, and where no one belonged here more than you? I think that that would be a place so beautiful, so radical, so welcoming, that people in this community would be hungry and thirsty to be a part of it. Sarah Miles walked into that church, lonely, frightened, afraid, an atheist, and a lesbian. Today, she is the director of ministry at St. Gregory of Nyssa in San Francisco, California. It's an amazing journey. Friends, this is the good news. No matter who you are or where you are on your journey through life, you are welcome here and you are invited to the table where bread and wine have been prepared. All things are now ready.